You were never supposed to hear these words. Not like this. Not in the quiet moment when your heart had almost convinced itself to stop waiting. Not after all the nights you whispered into the darkness, asking why love always seemed to arrive just one step too late. And certainly not after you finally told yourself that maybe the person your soul had been searching for had simply chosen another life. But something is changing. There is a confession moving toward you, and the strange part isn't that it exists. The strange part is that it was never meant to reach your ears. It escaped through a crack in someone's carefully built world, carrying emotions too heavy to stay hidden any longer. The moment those words were spoken, everything began to shift in ways no one expected, and you are standing closer to that moment than you realize, because someone who once smiled in wedding photographs, someone who promised forever with steady hands, has been carrying a truth that refuses to stay silent. And when they finally confessed it, everyone listening forgot how to speak. It began with something almost impossible to notice. Not a phone call, not a dramatic goodbye, just silence, the kind of silence that arrives before storms. The kind that sits in your chest for no obvious reason, making ordinary mornings feel unusually heavy. You tried to ignore it. You blamed exhaustion. You blamed coincidence. Yet every time you looked at the clock, the same repeating numbers appeared as though time itself wanted your attention. You wondered why your heart felt restless without explanation. You had no idea someone else's heart was breaking at the exact same moment. Far away, the person connected to your soul sat alone in a room that looked perfect from the outside. The house was beautiful. The walls were filled with memories. Pictures smiled back from polished frames. Everything looked complete. Everything looked successful. Everything looked exactly the way people imagined happiness should look, but appearances have always been skilled storytellers. And behind every carefully arranged smile was a question they had buried for years. What if I chose safety instead of destiny? That question refused to disappear. For years they convinced themselves they had done the right thing. They believed love could grow from commitment. They believed loyalty would eventually replace longing. They believed enough time could silence the voice inside that kept whispering your presence, even though they had never truly understood who you were. But destiny doesn't disappear because someone ignores it. It waits, patiently, quietly, like a river carving stone without making a sound, and every passing year only made that quiet voice stronger. Then something happened. No one expected it, not during a celebration, not surrounded by family, not while laughter echoed through rooms filled with people convinced everything was fine. Someone casually asked a simple question: if you could live your life again, would you change anything? The room laughed. Most people answered with jokes. Some spoke about careers. Others mentioned money. Then your soulmate became completely silent. The smile disappeared. The air changed. Even those who weren't paying attention suddenly felt something they couldn't explain. Because sometimes truth announces itself before words ever arrive. For several long seconds they stared into nothing. Almost as if they were watching another version of their own life unfold somewhere beyond the walls. Then they whispered 5 words that froze every conversation. I married the wrong person. No one moved. No one laughed anymore. Even the music suddenly felt distant. Those words landed like thunder inside a perfectly clear sky. People waited for an explanation. Some thought it was anger. Others assumed it was temporary frustration. But they were all wrong, because what came next carried years of hidden tears. With trembling hands they admitted something no one expected. I kept hoping the feeling would disappear. There was no shouting, no blame, only heartbreak. The kind that grows quietly over time until it becomes impossible to carry. I thought commitment would silence my heart. It never did. Every sentence became heavier. Every breath revealed another piece of a story no one knew existed. And somehow, every word pointed towards someone they couldn't name. Towards someone they had never completely forgotten. Towards someone they felt connected to long before understanding why. Toward you. The strange thing is this: you probably felt pieces of this without realizing it. Have you ever missed someone you couldn't identify? Have you ever felt sudden sadness during an otherwise peaceful day? Have you ever dreamed of familiar eyes belonging to a stranger? Those moments weren't meaningless. Sometimes souls recognize each other long before human minds can explain the connection, and your heart has been remembering something your memory cannot. After the confession, people kept asking questions. When did you know? Their answers shocked everyone again. I knew before the wedding. Silence returned. But I was afraid of disappointing people, afraid of destroying expectations, afraid of choosing uncertainty instead of security, afraid of trusting something invisible. So they walked toward a future that looked correct, while their soul quietly stayed behind. Years passed. Birthdays came and went. Holidays filled photo albums. Friends admired their life. Strangers envied their success. But inside, something sacred remained unfinished, because external happiness cannot replace internal truth. Not forever. Eventually every hidden feeling asks to be seen. Every buried tear demands sunlight. Every ignored destiny begins knocking louder than before. And recently, the knocking became impossible to ignore. It started through dreams. Dreams so vivid they woke up crying without understanding why. They kept seeing unfamiliar places that somehow felt like home. They kept hearing a voice speaking their name with unbelievable gentleness. Every morning the feeling remained. Every day reality seemed less convincing than whatever visited them during sleep. Until one unforgettable night, they saw your face, not clearly, not completely, just enough to know someone existed beyond imagination, someone real, someone waiting, someone whose presence felt older than time itself. When they opened their eyes, they whispered something into the darkness. If you're real, forgive me. No one heard those words, except perhaps the universe itself, because the following morning, impossible coincidences began appearing everywhere: songs, names, places, random conversations, repeating numbers, unexpected encounters, doors opening where walls once stood. The world suddenly behaved as though invisible hands were arranging pieces of an enormous puzzle. Even people around them noticed the strange pattern. They laughed about coincidence. But deep inside, they knew better. Destiny had stopped whispering. Now it was calling. Meanwhile, your own life may have felt confusing. Perhaps doors closed without explanation. Perhaps relationships ended despite your best efforts. Perhaps opportunities disappeared just before they became yours. You wondered whether life had forgotten you. But what if those endings weren't punishments? What if they were protection, because some paths must disappear before the right one becomes visible? Some heartbreaks exist only because a greater love is still trying to find its way through impossible circumstances. And yours has been traveling a very long road. The confession spread quietly, not across the internet, not through headlines, but from one heart to another. People couldn't stop talking about it because authenticity is rare, real regret is unforgettable. One listener later admitted they had never witnessed someone speak with such painful honesty. Another confessed they cried all the way home. Someone else canceled their own wedding after realizing they were making the same mistake. One person's truth awakened hidden truths inside countless others, but none of them understood the deepest part. This confession wasn't the ending, it was the beginning, because after admitting the truth aloud, something extraordinary happened. For the first time in years, they felt peace, not because the pain disappeared, but because pretending finally ended. Truth hurts, yet truth also heals, and healing has a way of opening doors that fear spent years keeping locked. One by one, those doors began to move, a message almost got sent, a journey nearly began, an old connection unexpectedly resurfaced. Then something happened that neither logic nor chance could fully explain. Someone mentioned your name, not directly, not intentionally, just enough to make their entire body freeze. Their heartbeat changed, the room disappeared, every forgotten feeling returned within seconds. How could a name carry so much emotion? How could someone they barely understood feel more familiar than the life they had been living for years? They couldn't answer. They only knew one thing: running from destiny had become far more painful than facing it. So they made a decision no one saw coming, a decision capable of changing two lives forever. But before taking the first step, before reaching toward the future, before crossing the invisible line between regret and redemption, they looked into the mirror, tears filling their eyes, and quietly said one final sentence: if destiny gives me one more chance, I won't let fear choose for me again. And at that exact moment, without knowing why, you felt something shift inside your own heart, as though an unseen thread connecting two distant souls had suddenly been pulled tight, and somewhere, just beyond the edge of everything you think you know, someone has already taken the first step toward you. But what they are carrying in their hands could change everything before either of you are ready to hear the next confession. You cannot see them yet. Not because they are far away, but because some moments in life remain hidden until your heart is finally prepared to recognize them. There are meetings that destiny protects with silence. There are conversations that heaven delays until every lesson has been learned. And there are souls that spend years walking separate roads, only to discover those roads were quietly leading toward the same place all along. That is exactly where your story is beginning to change, while the world continued moving as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Your soulmate sat alone with a decision that would rewrite everything they once believed about love. The confession had lifted a weight from their heart. But it had also created a new fear, What if I'm already too late? That question echoed through every quiet moment. Too late to repair the damage. Too late to ask for forgiveness. Too late to find the person they had been feeling without fully understanding. Too late to find you. The thought haunted them because regret has a strange way of making every passing minute feel like years. Every sunrise reminded them of another opportunity lost. Every sunset whispered about another day they could never reclaim, yet something inside refused to surrender. It wasn't pride, it wasn't obsession, it was hope, small, fragile, almost impossible to explain, the kind of hope that survives even when every logical reason says it should disappear, and that hope kept pointing in only one direction, toward you. At the very same time, your own life seemed filled with little interruptions that made no sense. Plans suddenly changed. Meetings were cancelled. Routes you usually took became blocked. People unexpectedly entered your life for only a few minutes before disappearing again. Each event felt random, each delay felt frustrating. You wondered why nothing was happening according to your plans. You never imagined that every interruption was quietly moving you into perfect alignment with a story much bigger than your own. Because destiny rarely announces itself with loud miracles, more often, it rearranges ordinary days until extraordinary moments become unavoidable, and that rearrangement had already begun. Then came another sign. One morning your soulmate opened an old box they hadn't touched in years. They weren't looking for memories. They weren't searching for answers. They simply reached inside without thinking. At the very bottom lay a faded photograph. Nothing unusual about it. No message written on the back. No obvious clue, yet the instant they picked it up, tears filled their eyes, not because of what they saw, because of what they suddenly remembered. There had always been a feeling, long before the wedding, long before the promises, long before the life everyone admired, a quiet feeling that somewhere in this enormous world, another soul existed who would understand them without explanation. They had ignored that feeling. They had called it imagination. Now they realized it had never been imagination at all. It had been recognition, recognition without introduction, love before meeting, a connection that existed beyond distance and beyond time. And once that realization settled into their heart, there was no returning to the life they had been pretending to live. Still, one question remained. Where were you? Every possibility seemed impossible. Every answer created 10 new questions. How do you search for someone you've never truly known? How do you explain a feeling that has no evidence? How do you tell anyone that your heart has been calling someone whose face exists only in dreams? Most people would laugh. Most people would dismiss it. Most people would tell them to move on. But souls do not obey opinions. Souls recognize truth. Even when the world cannot, days turned into weeks, yet instead of fading, the feeling grew stronger. It became impossible to concentrate. Certain songs seemed written specifically for them. Certain places felt strangely familiar. Even strangers occasionally said things that sounded like hidden messages. One elderly woman smiled as they passed and quietly said, "When two souls belong together, the longest road still ends at the same door." She kept walking before another word could be spoken. Your soulmate stood frozen. How could a complete stranger speak the exact words they needed to hear? That sentence stayed with them for days. Maybe longer, because sometimes heaven hides encouragement inside ordinary people, and sometimes the people delivering those messages never even realize what they've done. Meanwhile, your own heart continued changing in subtle ways. You noticed yourself becoming less interested in relationships that lacked depth. Conversations that once seemed exciting suddenly felt empty. You found yourself longing for something you couldn't describe. Not perfection, not fantasy, just truth, the kind of love where masks are unnecessary, where silence feels safe, where two people stop pretending to be understood because they already are. That longing wasn't appearing by accident, it was preparing space. Space for someone who was finally becoming brave enough to stop hiding behind the life they had built. Then, one evening, everything shifted again. Your soulmate received a message. It wasn't dramatic, just a few ordinary words from someone they hadn't spoken to in years. But hidden inside that conversation was a detail so unexpected that their entire body went still. A city, a date, a place. Three ordinary details that somehow connected to something they had dreamed about over and over again. The same city, the same season, the same feeling. Coincidence, perhaps, but after everything that had happened, coincidence no longer felt like the right explanation. They stared at the message for several minutes. Their hands trembled, their heart whispered the same sentence again. Go, nothing more, just one word, go. Sometimes destiny doesn't give detailed instructions, sometimes it offers only the next step, the rest is revealed while you're walking. So they made a choice they never thought they would make. They packed a small bag, not because they knew what they would find, because they finally accepted that not searching would hurt far more than searching and finding nothing. For the first time in years, fear was no longer leading their decisions. Hope was. As they closed the door behind them, the air felt different, lighter, almost sacred. It was as though an invisible chain had quietly fallen away. Miles away, you looked up from whatever you were doing. A strange peace settled over you without explanation. You couldn't explain why your heart suddenly felt lighter. You couldn't explain why you smiled for no reason. You couldn't explain why, for just a brief moment, it felt like someone was thinking about you with every ounce of their soul. Because someone was. Every mile they traveled carried a silent prayer. Every sunrise became another reminder that miracles often begin with impossible decisions. Every heartbeat repeated the same question, what if this time? I'm finally walking toward the life I was always meant to live, but destiny still had one final surprise waiting. Because before your paths could cross, before your eyes could meet, before a single word could be spoken, someone from the past stepped into the road ahead, carrying a secret that had been hidden for years, and the truth they were about to reveal threatened to destroy everything your soulmate believed they finally understood. The moment they saw that familiar face standing across the road, time seemed to lose its rhythm, every sound faded. The passing cars disappeared into silence, even the wind seemed to pause, as if the world itself understood that what was about to happen had been waiting for years. It was someone they had trusted, someone who had witnessed every important chapter of their life. Someone who knew pieces of the story that had never been spoken aloud. Your soulmate's first instinct was to turn away, not because they were afraid of the person, because they were afraid of the truth that person might already know. Then the stranger smiled, not with happiness, with sadness, the kind of smile that belongs to someone who has carried another person's secret for far too long. I've been wondering when you'd finally come. Those words sent a chill through your soulmate's entire body. What do you mean? The answer came slowly. I knew this day would arrive. Your soulmate stared in disbelief. How? The stranger looked toward the sky before speaking again. Because I saw what happened years ago, and I've regretted staying silent ever since. Every heartbeat grew louder. What happened? The stranger closed their eyes for a moment, gathering the courage to unlock a memory that had been buried beneath years of guilt. You weren't supposed to marry them. Those words landed harder than the original confession. Your soulmate felt the ground beneath their feet disappear. I don't understand. You were trying to follow your heart. Their breathing became uneven, but someone convinced you that your heart was wrong. Suddenly, forgotten memories began returning like flashes of lightning, conversations, warnings, opinions. Family expectations, friends insisting that practical choices mattered more than invisible feelings, voices telling them to stop dreaming, voices saying love wasn't enough, voices saying certainty mattered more than connection. Little by little, those voices had become louder than their own soul, until they no longer recognized which thoughts belonged to them, and which had been planted by fear. The stranger wiped away a tear. I watched you ignore every sign. I wanted to stop you.